Hi everyone. Am I audible, visible? Hi Parmesh, hi Aniket, hi Ankiti, hi Abhina, and hi to all our listeners. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. And firstly, thank you so much to the Nudge Foundation and Dalberg for setting up this space. I've been listening to the previous conversation, and it's been really, really empowering and really moving. So, a lot to stand on. It's not easy to go next, but I'm really excited to be here today. Today, in our conversation, we're talking about it's called a seat at the table. And we're talking about the fact that a lot of policies and programs are formulated and imagined and implemented, keeping in mind men. And not just men, keeping in mind cisgender men, heterosexual men. And a lot of times, the way that they play out is not necessarily very inclusive of those with different experiences, particularly women and gender minorities. And today we're here to talk about how that can change and how policies, programs, and businesses can be implemented with more of a gender lens to include women and include gender minorities better. I'm Medhavi. I'm a journalist at the BBC. Thank you, Shweta, for the introduction earlier. And without any further delay, I would like to take the great privilege of introducing the amazing people that I get to share this space with. So to start off with, I'm really happy to see Mr. Parmesh Shahani here. Parmesh is the founder of Godrej's India Culture Lab. He is a champion and a pioneer and a trailblazer when it comes to the advocation of and the inclusion of LGBT people at the workplace in corporate India. He's pioneered this not just at his own organization, Godrej, but also at a number of other leading Indian companies, and has also written 2 books around the subject. Absolutely amazing and great to have you with us, Parmesh. Good morning. It's a very subtle plug. I believe you're on mute.
Thanks. Really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having on.
Thank you so much, Parmesh. Next, I'd like to introduce Abhina. Abhina Aher. She's a transgender activist. She was born a boy, transitioned to a woman, and now identifies as a woman. Her pronouns are she and her. And she spent more than 20 years of her life, dedicated them really to the space of transgender rights and human rights, and particularly in the space of healthcare and HIV awareness and prevention. Truly amazing feat, and so happy to have you here with us, Abhina. Sorry, I'm not able to hear you. Is that just for me? Could you please check your audio settings? I see that you are not on mute, so perhaps could be something else. Nope, still can't hear you. Mm-mm. So I guess for now, I'll just go ahead and introduce the rest of our panel. And I would, sincerely request the Dalberg team to help Abina set up her audio backstage. And moving on, I'm really happy to have with us Ankiti Bose. She's the CEO and founder of Zilingo, an e-commerce company, which she started at the age of 23, and now it's almost a unicorn. It's worth $970 million, and her organization now employs more than 500 people across 8 countries. A truly amazing feat, and so happy to have a young female entrepreneur with us. Welcome, Ankiti.
Thank you, Madhvi.
And last but definitely not the least, I'm really happy to have with us Aniket Dogar. Aniket is also an entrepreneur, and he works in the space of development, social impact. He's the CEO and co-founder of a startup called Hak Darshak, which basically is in the space of last mile delivery of government welfare and financial services, and actually bringing policies to people and helping them translate into benefits. So amazing work, Aniket, and so happy to have you with us.
Thanks, Melody. Great to be here.
Awesome, great. So let's get started. And the first thing that clearly we're here for is to talk about gender to a large extent. And I'm really happy to see that we have so much diversity on the panel, and I'd love for our audiences to experience that. So I'd like all of us to go around and describe ourselves in terms of our gender using three words or three phrases. This could be about your gender identity. This could be about your sexuality. This could be, what your values are when it comes to gender, or simply what gender means to you. Any three words or three phrases. I'll take the privilege of starting. So for me, one, I identify as a woman. Two, I am cisgender, heterosexual. And thirdly, I identify as an intersectional feminist, something which is an ongoing journey and, something I aspire to be, to do better at. And next, I would request Parmesh to tell us, to identify himself using three words or three phrases when it comes to his gender.
Thanks. So I identify as an out and proud gay Indian man for whom my gender and sexuality are both natural and intrinsic. So that was like 15 words, but I tried to make it three phrases.
Thank you. Love your choice of words there, Parmesh. I'd like to go to Abhina next.
Thank you, Madhavi. Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me
can hear
now?
you
God,
loud and clear.
thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege. I've been part of the previous discussions also with Ghazal and Sushi, and it has been really wonderful. It's amazing to have this charcha, which is very quite essential at the 75th of, and at the verge of 75th Independence Day. The three words that for me, I think when it comes to gender is, of course, the identity, because that's what our lives as a trans people revolve around. For us, gender expression, gender identity is very important. The second is pride, because we live with it. We take it with a lot of pride, and a lot of times gender, misgendering can be considered as a crime for all of us. So it is very essential for us. And third is, I think, sisterhood. I am also come from a feminist background, and I do believe in a strong sisterhood movement to look into the vulnerabilities, difference, and gaps of the society and mitigating them with the justice, and at the same time with a non-judgmental environment where people can flourish and live their own life. Thank you so much, Madhuri.
Thank you so much. I hear you, sister. Next, I'd like to go to Ankiti. Your three words or three phrases, please.
Hi, Madhvi. I think my three words, the first one I was thinking of was community, which is almost exactly like sisterhood. Much like in most areas of life, even in startups or the corporate world, we, are constantly, for the lack of a better word, fighting the bro club. So sisterhood slash community. Second one, I think for me would be resilience and anti-fragility. Everything bad that comes our way, I feel like we have to use our unique strengths to fight them instead of becoming like where the power resides today, which is mostly the heterosexual male in the office. And the third one for me would just be love and acceptance, right? I think a lot of us struggle with just accepting ourselves and our identity. So I think that's the third one for me.
Thanks. I totally agree on the acceptance part. It's, I think, a lifelong and ongoing journey for all of us. And Aniket, over to you.
Yeah, so I think for me, I identify myself as a heterosexual male. And I think with that, the second thing that I kind of identify my gender with is a lot of privilege that comes with it by default in our society. And with that, I think the third thing that I really think about gender is inclusion and equal opportunity. I think most importantly, I feel like where I would like to see kind of, or I strive to kind of think of is like wherever possible there is equal opportunity, and that means somewhere giving a head start to a lot of genders which are not as privileged as heterosexual men are.
Thank you so much, Aniket, for being so frank and for recognizing your privilege so clearly and openly for us. It's really nice to hear. And I think to take this conversation forward, we're here to basically talk about inclusion and to bring a gender lens to different aspects of our life. But I think to truly talk about how inclusion can take place, it's really important to talk about how exclusion takes place and what exclusion looks like or feels like for women and gender minorities. So I'd like to ask, any of us, all of us really, to talk about experiences of exclusion because of gender that we have either personally experienced or observed in, our workplaces, in public spaces, in family structures, or, any of the domains around us. So starting with you, Parmesh, have you personally experienced exclusion in any domain as a gay man, and how have you dealt with a situation like that?
So it's not just me, but I think the entire LGBTQ community. I would actually extend that further. I would say anyone who's not part of the imagined mainstream faces both structural exclusion all the time as well as daily microaggressions, and the cost and impact of these, whether on the economy. For example, the World Bank did a report some years ago saying just the cost of exclusion in the Indian economy of LGBTQ people was $32 billion a couple of years ago, and that was 1% of the GDP. So I hope someone, who works in economics at governmental, at various state and central government positions is listening, because a great way of actually bumping up our GDP is to make our, country more inclusive. That really has ramifications in so many ways. So structural exclusion happens all the time. It happens in how systems are designed by able-bodied, straight men, mostly in India, upper caste, upper class, and and all these other aspects of privilege, in how jobs are created and how interviews are. Since we're talking about the workplace, how interviews are conducted, the whole idea how merit is framed. So a woman who comes back to the workplace, for example, after taking a year off, because of pregnancy, and maternity and childbirth, will be considered less meritorious than a man who has stayed in that position. People will not consider the merit of what does it mean to actually go have an incredible experience, learn how to multitask, learn how to be innovative, and count that as merit, count that as unique merit, right? So the way, because it's men, who are designing these systems, and so to me, like, the longer time you spend doing the same thing is not meritorious. Having an experience, like maternity and coming back brings you back into the workforce with incredible skills, but that is not considered merit, right? So one is how these structures are designed. Likewise for trans people, likewise for so many other minorities. And the second is the microaggressions that you face every day. And I'm quite tired. I'm quite tired and exhausted of having to, like, in small things, if someone will say, how are you? How is your partner? If they know, and then they'll say, is it the same partner? I don't ask straight people, are you still with your same wife? Or are you still with your same husband? It's just these small microaggressions on a daily basis that we all have to deal with. It's quite frustrating. Or if you're closeted, the effort that you make in trying to hide, or if your organization is not inclusive, the effort on you to not share a vital part of you. It's quite frustrating on a daily basis, and this is all of us on this panel have. I was going back to the earlier panel. Like, all of us in this panel have privilege, and there are so many of us who are not in these spaces, who go through so much more, and who are not perhaps able to articulate it at these forums as well, right? So it happens at various levels. Is my perspective.
Most definitely. And, thank you for pointing out the very tangible impact of, exclusion to the economy and, what it feels like on a day-to-day basis to be subject to the microaggressions that you talked about. I'd really like to ask Abhina next, as a transgender woman, how have you experienced exclusion in your day-to-day life? Could you give us some examples of this?
Yeah, it has come in a various aspects to me and in various categories. I would like to say, while growing up, as as somebody who's non-fitting into the binaries of the world, it was very difficult for me to also access the basic facilities like washrooms, where I end up having a lot of urinal problems, because I was not comfortable going to washrooms in the recess times. I used to wait for lectures to start, and then I could go and do the nature call. While I was growing also, like for example, the opportunities that were available for me, like I wanted to learn dance, but it never happened to me very easily, though my mother is a dancer herself. She couldn't relate me, because I was born with the male sex. It was assumed that I will become a man. There was no perspective to the society, to my family also, about what was going wrong with me. And a lot of perceptions that were there, it's always like associated with that. Okay, if you are like that, which means you are important, or you are intersex child. That's the perception that people have. In the education times also, I had to hide my identity. The earliest encounters that I had with the transgender people were begging on the signals, and I realize I am like that. But if I take that as a choice, I get shut down from all the possibilities of earning with the dignity. I will not
Hmm.
be able to complete my education. So in my college times also, in my school times also, I ended up kind of hiding myself, and for a longest period of my life I lived as a man, because there
Right.
wasn't any opportunities for me to do, if I transition myself. When I started working also, there was a huge amount of stigma, discrimination, and exclusion came at the workplace, because they were not willing to. There were a lot of, uh, uh, perspectives about things. Like for example, you should not behave like this. You should not dress up like this. You should not be speaking like. You should not be having your perspective as a woman. And when I transitioned, finally that become more torturous, because then I was out and loud there. The difference between me and Parmesh is probably is that, till the time Parmesh will not come as an outspoken gay, people will not come to know. It will be like pass on like a cisgender male person, and he will have all the possibilities of privileges of patriarchy that can come to his way. But for me, I'm at your disposal. I mean, anybody can pick up a stone and throw at me. Within the 100 people also, you can identify me as somebody is different. And that really took a big issue with me. Like for 3 years of my life, I was surviving on sex work, because I had qualification, I had a post graduation degree, but nobody was willing to give me an employment the moment I transitioned myself. And every time when I used to go to the work, because I belong to a social sector, there used to be a lot of uh, uh, there was a lot of preconditions saying that is, you have to dress up as a male. As a male, you cannot dress
Hmm.
up as a woman if you have to come to things. And it has not ended over there. I almost right now 45, and still I am going through a lot of problem in difficult times, like commuting. Even if I have to make an air travel or something like that, there are times when I have seen the exclusion of people just changing their seats because I am sitting next to
Hmm.
them, as if that I am sitting on their lap. But they get immense pleasure of just displaying their uncomfort about this aspect. When I was transitioning from one country to another country, though I have a transgender as an passport,
Hmm.
there were people who mobbed me. There were security guards who mobbed me, who wanted to undress me in a public just to see my genitals. To And women who refused to frisk me when I was telling them that you can frisk me, but I would not be comfortable if a man is frisking me. And it was not, and it was in Saudi. I was like in the middle of mayhem. I didn't know what to do about it. There was time when I was traveling for work, with all the possible proof with me, including ID card, including job contract, everything. But there were
Yeah.
17 hotels in a row which refused the admission when I was traveling to Kerala in 2011.
Hmm.
By saying that is, we don't have people like you staying in a hotel, and we cannot, you can't say anything to them. This is our private hotels. They have right to admission. privacy policy where they can just throw you out. I felt like I'm like Gandhi walking into the Taj Mahal without slippers, with slippers, and they are throwing me out because just I'm wearing a slipper of coming from a socio-economical background, and so on and so forth. There has been lot of things. Right now also, Medhavi, like for example, I am shut down from health insurance policies.
Hmm.
I don't have coverage for my mother because I don't fit into the binary family structures of a society where people would be able to give me health coverage, insurance coverage, and other related aspect, because there are
Yeah.
so many issues related to my documentation. Many times, I've been shut down from my property rights or any other facility. So people like me go through a several kind of exclusion because the way we are,
Definitely.
the
I
choices that we make. Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear, about the experiences that you've been through, Abhina, in your lifetime. And you're perfectly right that, within the LGBTQ community, transgender people are some of the most visible, and because of that, some of the most marginalized. So I'm really happy that you have been able to share these experiences with us, because it's really important that they be heard, and for people at large to understand the specific struggles of the transgender community. So thank you so much, Abhina, for your strength. I'd like to ask Ankiti next, to share with us, whether you have felt excluded at the workplace at some point in your career.
Madhavi, for sure, right? I think, like Parmesh said, the structural exclusion is very obvious, and then there's the other microaggressions and the non-structured, um, uh, very hurtful things that actually hurt us financially also. But hearing Abhina's description of the things that she had to go through, I think you're right. The everything merits solving, but some of this stuff is just first of all incredibly brave of you, Abhina, to share with us. But at the same time, it makes you think about how much we are all losing out as a community, as an economy, by just acting on our biases. And it's just it's an incredible waste of all of our talent and collective potential. I think just acknowledging the privilege of not having to had to go through any of that. I would
Hmm.
still say the where I think most women struggle, where I have personally felt, that we struggle a lot, is obviously the positions of power, whether it's in our country or internationally, are still held by majority by men, heterosexual men of whatever is the majority ethnicity or community in that country, right? And what that means is that there aren't enough of anybody else in the rooms where decisions are made, which means that when you're trying to do business, you would either face, if you're lucky, you would just face exclusion, wherein your decision making power is in question because you don't conform to a certain gender or certain expected norm. But it often gets worse because you're penalized for that economically, you're penalized for that in business, and sometimes because in business you have to get the job done, you would actually be in a situation where you would take a heterosexual man with you to get the job done, who would be considered to be the authority. And even it doesn't matter if whether they are really the authority or not. But you do that, and honestly, like in our business, it's supply chain. We have I've probably interacted with a lot of traders and factory owners, and even tech companies, financial institutions. It happens all the time. It probably happens 99% of the times, especially in the beginning. Then there's the other aspect of being a young woman. I think there is definitely, and we should address that as well, is that there is exclusion and not having power to make decisions, but there is also the scope of being exploited just simply for existing and asking for that power, right? And
Definitely.
that is obviously something that's incredibly obvious to us all. We read the news every day. But the sad thing is, I think, going back to the fact that what Parmesh said about 1% of GDP, that brought me to the other statistic that we were discussing earlier before the panel, Medvi, is that probably I think in urban India, women's participation in the labor force used to be, I think, 15-16%. Now it's fallen down to single digits. The problem with that is that on the one hand, just doing the math, on the one hand, if we want to become a $5 trillion economy, then there is a lot of work that we need to do. If about half of the workforce, basically all the women and the entire LGBTQ community is not able to live up to their economic potential, then just the math doesn't work out. So definitely it has long-term ramifications for us as an economy.
For sure. Thanks so much for sharing this, Ankiti. And, we were talking about the issue of female labor force participation rate earlier, something we'll get onto later as well. But thanks for sharing your experiences as a young woman and a female entrepreneur in the workspace. And Aniket, I really want to ask you, as a cisgender heterosexual man, what have you observed in your workspaces in the organization that you run? And have you experienced or observed around you that women and gender minorities are excluded in some realms?
No, so I think a lot what the other panelists already spoke about. I think that's kind of an observation that is very evident in any workplace, and that's the same that I saw. I think there was a conscious effort from day one to try and build a very inclusive organization. I think we're just starting. I think we're way off in terms of reaching where we want to. But I think where I have seen a lot of exclusion is also right at the top. At the investor level. Like, for example, if I'm appointing someone as a finance head who's a woman, right, or somebody who is not the traditional roles, a tech head who's a woman, that's really questioned by an investor or a donor. Like, oh, are you okay with that decision? Are you going to be fine if she takes a maternity leave? What will happen to the company? So I think these are questions as founders that you constantly get asked. There is very little that, unfortunately, apart from merit, these things come into the equation very often rather than pure merit. And I think that's something that I have observed at the workplace right at the top. Also, we work actively with women on the ground. So all our field teams are women. And I think there we have seen that largely when we had built out the solution, we had thought that, it's going to be more of a technology and an access issue, which is there, but it's more of, as we know, a patriarchal issue. We have, when we are training women on the ground to become agents, in our case, like we can get them the smartphones, we can get them the digital literacy, financial literacy, all access. But at the end of the day, they won't get the smartphone to use. During COVID, none of the women got the smartphone to use. It's not the first, they are not the first members who get the phone. So how do you fight that? And like Ankiti just mentioned, I think with our economy where it is unfortunate that apart from all the things that our country already faces of caste, religion, economic issues, and then we are putting gender on it. Something which I feel, all the things, yes, but something that I think should not be even on the table. This is something that an equal opportunity in education, in health, in every access to all gender is something that we really need to do. And also, there is this, and to this, I think that's where I feel that a lot of lead has to be taken by the privileged gender, which is the heterosexual man. I think there is this campaign, I don't know if anybody has heard of it, of the government, because we work in government schemes, the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign. And and I always feel that it should be Beti Bachao and Beta Padhao campaign. I think we will be able to say a lot more, because I think that becomes a very important part of how we are looking at inclusivity. I think that information, communication, that this problem exists in the first place. We all of us face it through experiences, but I think right from the beginning, if that is something that can be encouraged and kind of communicated to everyone, that acknowledge first that this exists. Everything is not just because you're running a big organization, sometimes a corporate organization doesn't mean that these problems exist. So I think that's what I've seen a lot in terms of our partners or in the workplace, in our own workplace.
Yeah, really excellent points, Aniket. And I really liked what you were saying about, the investment ecosystem earlier and how you need change there as well. For example, in the US, female entrepreneurs get only about 2% of venture funding, even though they own a good 38% of businesses. And there's also data to say that, male and female entrepreneurs get actually asked different questions by investors, by venture capitalists, and it affects how much funding they get at the end of the day. And the business impacts of this are many. But first, to kick off, I want to talk a little bit about COVID, and how the pandemic has impacted women and gender minorities. We've talked about experiences of inclusion, and a lot of those have only been heightened by the pandemic. And for many of us, lockdown and work from home meant being at home where we can be safe. But for a lot of women and gender minorities, home is not necessarily the safest place. A lot of times, home can mean a hostile environment, an unsafe or an insecure environment where you can be subjected to physical, verbal, or even sexual abuse. And I think this issue is very poignant, particularly for LGBT youth. So, for instance, there's a research that suggests that up to 2/3 of LGBTQ youth actually hear their own family members making negative comments about the LGBTQ community, and only 1 in 4 LGBT youth, young person, feels like they can be themselves at home, which is a really unfortunate statistic. And Parmesh, I want to bring this to you. Do you feel that how lockdown and COVID has impacted LGBT youth needs to be a bigger concern? And for you personally, have you also, as a gay man, found yourself in a unsafe, insecure environment that you had to struggle to get out of?
So I think everything that you said should really resonate with people listening, and this is a moment where our organizations and institutions can really step up. So we've seen what Ankiti was saying in terms of numbers of women dropping out of the workforce because of COVID. These are very, very fundamental issues that should concern all of us, and this is the moment where we can intervene to set in place systems that can create better environments for women, so that women come back to the workforce, can create facilitation environments. So likewise for LGBTQ, I think it's we've seen enough pictures, whether it's shocking pictures of migrants walking on the road, and everything that you said about LGBTQ people facing higher levels of stress because work from home is not pleasurable for us. Often it's a prison sentence. Our homes are not all. Our homes are. Our offices often are safe spaces for us, not our homes. So I want to focus on how can people use this moment, because if we have to move into a new normal, I think organizations, whether it is governments at different levels, and there's interesting, even through COVID, there are some incredible state-supported endeavors that have come. I hope Abhina tells you about Garima Grah. There are progressive governments like Tamil Nadu, which have collaborated with trans entrepreneurs like Grace Pano, and they've set up India's first trans-led agriculture cooperative and a dairy cooperative society through COVID, which is a great role model for how public-private partnerships can take place. There are LGBTQ job fairs that are happening through COVID. Progressive organizations are recognizing that this is a moment where we don't just need to talk, but we need to walk the talk and use this moment to bring on board talent, women talent, queer talent, other kinds of minority talent, PWD talent, because this is that moment where if we can serve these communities at this moment and bring them on board, they will help us create that next normal or that new normal, right? So things are very, very, have been very bad. But I think we need to recognize that at this moment also in the private equity space, in entrepreneurship, even with various state governments and perhaps hopefully with the national government as well, there is a recognition that, we need to create better systems in future. And I want to actually maybe, think about those possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to take a follow-up question with you on that. So, the LGBTQ community in India, Parmesh, is like 100 million strong, and increasingly companies and startups are recognizing that this community has significant spending power, and they value where they spend their money. They want to spend money at products and services that are catered for them, and a lot of industries like, tourism, healthcare, even fashion, hospitality are trying to target themselves towards LGBTQ customers and in something which is called the pink economy. I want to ask you how you see this phenomenon, and at what point, do you think that it is inclusive, or do you think that there is a risk of it becoming tokenistic or pink washing to some extent? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, there's an entire chapter in Queeristan, and the title of that chapter is "We Want Your Jobs, Not Your Instagram Filters." The title of the job chapter is "No Token Rainbows, Please." So I see all of that. Look, I'm all about pink washing, rainbow. I mean, I'm not all about it. I'm all about celebrating this during Pride Month and all of that. But I think it's very clear that your own employees, your own customers, your own stakeholders will see you for who you are. In today's world, it's not, you can't hide. Your authentic self comes out. So, India's LGBTQ economy is worth $200 billion with a burr. Now, of course, I want organizations to tap into it, but you all tap into it by engaging with the queer community, by engaging with queer talent, by engaging with queer NGOs, by creating job opportunities, by showcasing queer people in your advertisements, like how so many ads are doing, whether it's Brooklyn Led Rebel, a big company like Unilever, or a small company like Bhima Jewels. By creating products for queer people, there are actually at this moment, I can't tell you, but friends of mine who are working in other companies are working with incredible financial institutions to create products targeted to queer people. So there is, if as an organization you do all of this, then I'm very happy that you do. A pink washing, Brinda, is when you just paint yourself queer friendly but don't do anything substantial towards it. So you don't change your policies, you don't hire queer people, you don't address the queer market, you don't give your money to LGBTQ issues, you just pretend to be queer friendly. So, Medhavi, I think there's a great opportunity, but that opportunity lies for authentic companies who are willing to walk the talk, not just talk. And on that note, I'm going to elegantly slide off in my lilac, not pink shirt. I know everyone else is going to have an incredible conversation.
Yes, I know you have to leave early, but it was great to have you with us, Parmesh. See you around. Abhina, I really want to come to you next. In 2014, we saw a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court in India, which was a massive victory for transgender rights. India's Supreme Court recognized the transgender community as a third gender, and it ruled that Indians have the right to determine their own gender. It was a big move. And today, 7 years later, where do you think the transgender community stands? What are some of the progresses that have been made? And more importantly, because of COVID, do you think some of these gains have been erased because a lot of a big proportion of the transgender community, like we were talking about earlier, is engaged in begging or sex work as a source of livelihood or events, and almost all of those have been affected by lockdowns and by the pandemic?
So thank you so much, Mary, for your question. I think what we need to understand that before 2014 also, it was almost 15 years we were screaming and shouting and header-lock with the government to give us that identity. It has been 75 proud years for Indian independence, but for us, it is just 8 years because we just got independence on 2014. So we are already running 100 years behind compared to the other binary genders that we can talk about it. In 2014, actually, Supreme Court gave an acknowledgement that there could be something called as a third gender. Of course, it has not been defined, but the Nalsa judgment, which was given by Supreme Court, was a very progressive judgment. It is a historical judgment. In fact, after that, several other countries adopted that, including Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, various other countries which are there in Asia adopted that. But unfortunate part was this was the same time when the government transition which was in power. and it took almost 5 years for government to sort out who are transgender people. So there were a lot of clarifying questions that were asking, which is basic: who are hijra people? Like what are the LGBT? How do you protect other queer people from taking benefits that are coming for transgender from this particular kind of a law? What do you mean by OBC? Who decides OBC? So if we
Hmm.
lost almost 5 years of work that's supposed to be happen. Then there was a private bill which was introduced by Tiruchi Siva in Rajya Sabha. After that, government said that we will come up with the very progressive bill, and finally government came up with the act in 2019 December. And that act still lacks with lot of the gaps that could have been a very essential. For example, it
Hmm.
doesn't talk at all about the reservation. It doesn't talk about gender neutral punishments for the gender based violence. So like for example, if a cis woman, as a cis woman, if you go through a rape or any sort of humiliation, the person who is creating that kind of a punishment activity on you can go for a life imprisonment, or can have kind of it can that person could be hanged till death also. But with
Yeah.
transgender, the maximum punishment can happen from 6 months to 7 years, which is a very
Shocking difference.
unrealistic kind of a thing. So like, which example that anybody can walk away with by doing anything with a transgender person, and you don't have to worry about that. If anybody people can murder transgender people, and for that sake they don't get any life imprisonment for that. um,
Hmm.
so the moment the work started, people started first building jails for transgender people rather than talking about welfare. So there were so many things. The first development that happened was creating a separate jail for transgender people, as if the transgender people are criminals, and that is
Hmm.
where they have to start the development from. We still are not there. We still not there on the reservation plethora. We still are not there on the healthcare. We are still not there on various other aspects. But with the transgender act that came, did talked about some of the things of mitigation of stigma and discrimination. It talked about having a transgender council. Again, within that transgender council also the government reserved the right of decision. So you can have
Hmm.
people over there as a transgender people, but the ultimate decision will be taken by the government. The transgender welfare board that was promised by the Nalsa judgment didn't pull out further. So still we don't have transgender welfare boards in the state, and there's no mechanism to ensure that transgender welfare happens. And the good thing, that couple of things that were mentioned into the bill, was that there will be a national portal for transgender people.
I think we've lost
Transgender
Abhina.
documentation.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear
Sorry, we
me?
lost
Hello.
you. You're back.
Yeah. So the good thing about that, there was an online portal which was promised, and Garima Grah, which Parmesh just mentioned, which is basically a house of transgender who face crisis and who need shelter, can go through a skill building or career ready program and get
Yeah.
employment. So that's a good part about it. In COVID time, what happened, Medvi, the entire structure go haywire. We are talking about 500,000 of transgender people as per 2011 census.
Yeah.
Again, it is a tip of iceberg. In any progressive society, the UNAIDS gap report talks about it. At least 1% of population will be identifying transgender. With that
Hmm.
virtue, if you talk about 1.3 billion population, at least 13 lakhs to 15 lakh transgender people are there, and
Yeah.
we still don't consider them as a vote bank. In COVID times, what happens is that some of the data that talk about it, there are 80-85% population who survive, trans women who survive on sex work and baking and basti badai, and they lack with the social entitlements. They lack with the social documentations like Aadhaar card, PAN card, which can give
Hmm.
access. Government decided immediately to give 1,500 rupees in their bank account, but none of them had a bank account. None of them had a
Right.
bank account name and the Aadhaar card name matching with each other. So even government wanted to give that money, that facility was not rolling down further. There was huge amount of gender based violence, migration, because transgender people go to various places to earn. So like for
Hmm.
example, if I belong to Maharashtra, I can go for a basti badai to MP where I can get some money, and they got trapped over there without any support, any so it only binary migration was talked about, but transgender migration nobody spoke about at that point of time. There was huge
Yes.
amount of gender based violence and partner violence, because a lot of transgenders take, they take care of their partners practically, because प्यार तो सबको मांगता है. So many times, we have to take care of our partners, that we take care of their expenses and everything, and they face huge amount of partner violence. There was no occupation. Lot of them, the national data talks about it. There is almost 5% of transgender living with HIV nationally, and in some of the state it could go up to 40% and 30% also. So these people were lacked with the ARV medication. They lacked with hormones, which is very important for them, because hormone like lifelong therapy that the transgender person has to go through. Basic food and shelter, these are the issues that we face. The unfortunate part about that, there was no data about transgender people. Even if you pick up the data now, if you Google it, you will see like 35 lakh population was affected with COVID, 4 lakh died, and 31 lakh recovered. But there is no data on transgender. How many people died because of COVID? How many people got COVID? There's no data about that. In fact, we did not even get dignified death after that death. First of all, our bodies, people don't feel comfortable to touch. On top of that, if you die with the COVID, the healthcare professionals were not even willing to dispose the body that was identified as a transgender people. In the entire country, only one state announced the quarantine center, which was in Manipur, and only one center announced the COVID center for vaccination, which is in Odisha. But the entire India is completely silenced on what has to be done about these 13 to 14 lakh of the transgender people. Do they fall into the prioritization, or they don't fall into the prioritization?
Yeah, that's a really
but the last
comprehensive.
thing I want to highlight is that despite of that, transgender people who are begging for rest of their life, they did not care about their life. They were there at the signals with the police during the lockdown period, refraining people from the movement. They were feeding the people with all the small savings that they could have into their smaller territories and making them survive. Just so all the people who call them as a beggars, or why do these people beg on signal, these are the same hands which were feeding people during the time of COVID as a humanity cause.
That's a really comprehensive picture on how the transgender community has been impacted by COVID in many different ways, and it just really brings to light how this conversation has been completely missing from the mainstream agenda when we talk about how COVID has impacted us as a country. So thank you so much for pointing that out, Abhina, and lots to unpack there, which we will get into. I also want to go to Ankiti on the issue of unpaid care work and how that's been affected by COVID. In India, unpaid care work and how how women do much more unpaid care work in India than men was already an issue. The data suggests that Indian women do 9.8 times more unpaid care work than men. This could include, household chores, cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, taking care of elderly, sick people, and so on. And the data also suggests that this gap is actually widened by a solid 30% thanks to the pandemic. So, Ankiti, as a female professional who also employs, so many other female professionals, how do you observe the issue? Have you personally experienced this disparity in how unpaid care, how care work is dealt with? And as an employer and as a boss, how do you help your female employees navigate these difficulties during the pandemic?
Absolutely, Madhavi. This is a top of mind problem for us, and I think for anybody that's employing women. So what we see is a very specific thing, right? Between the ages of 28 and 40, especially, women are at the point in their careers where they have to work very hard to advance. In that same age group, men are almost entirely focused on their own careers and moving ahead there. But women start falling off of the workforce because they have to take care of home and kids, and if they don't, then they feel quite guilty. So the first problem is that the coaching, mentoring, and just the infrastructure around women to actually enable them to stay at the job. But then what happens is a bigger problem starts emerging, which is oftentimes something that the employer alone cannot solve by creating infrastructure, is of the load of the unpaid work, genuinely taking away time and bandwidth from a woman who's also employed or also going to work, because the unpaid work is so much. Obviously, they don't have as much time for what they what they would be doing if the unpaid work was divided equally, or if there was help available, and so on and so forth. And help availability is not just a financial question, it's a societal question. It's about safety, security, leaving your kids at home, who you leave them with. There's just a lot of aspects to it than just money. And as a result of that, what happens is one of two things. One is that women stop progressing in their careers in exactly that age where it really matters a lot. The women stop progressing in their careers and therefore lose out opportunities to make their own economic condition better, or worse, they fall off entirely and get off the workforce. And then when they are trying to come back, and there are several organizations and in fact just companies now trying to just rehire and reskill women and get them back into as high positions as at least as what they left, right? But that becomes like an incredible gap to fill. Now, what's happened with the pandemic is that this has only gotten worse, which means that more women had to do much more unpaid work, making sure that kids' Zoom classes were, attended, and all kinds of, other stresses of making sure that everybody was at home and everybody's needs were met. There was a lot more unpaid work. They would not have as much time to do work, even though they were working from home, and many of them fell off of the workforce. And bringing them back is honestly going to be a huge struggle, because there is enough data to show us that when women come back to the workforce, they rarely get back even at the same place. Above is almost entirely unheard of. We've taken, and this is a work in progress, obviously, we've taken the lens of especially women in that sort of 25 to 40, help them with as much coaching, mentoring, and external help as possible, right? So there's obviously financial help, but also can we create infrastructure at home for these women that can actually support them to be at work and not give up. But it's a much bigger problem than one startup or one entity or one organization, because honestly, what we'll see is that the huge impact of what has happened in the last 12 to 15 months is going to have impact on not just on women in the workforce, women's earnings, but also women's wealth and their savings and how much they're able to invest. And what we'll see if we don't fix this is that in 5 to 10 years, because compounding is so important and our base is shrinking, the wealth gap between women and men will be even more pronounced, most likely. I mean, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but unless we fix it, it's only going to get progressively worse. So honestly, this is a very, very tricky and awful place to be, because we could have very well been in a position like in several countries where of course different infrastructure is available, where the gap is not that much pronounced for the women when it comes to unpaid work. But I think in various parts of Asia and India, what we see is that the burden falls on the woman, and obviously they're not economically compensated for it, and perhaps corporate entities and governments have to work together to be able to solve this. This is definitely not something that one or the other can solve. There's also a huge societal expectation and family structure aspect to this, because the expectation is that the woman would give up what she's doing and take care of the household, the economic ramifications of which are severe. So it's definitely, I think, for the next 5 years, a very, very important problem to solve, to get it at least back to where it was pre-COVID, which in and of itself was quite bad.
And, do you think women entrepreneurship and female entrepreneurs have a role to play here? People like yourself. The reason I'm asking is because in India, according to 2014 data, only about 14% of women own or run businesses, which means that there's huge untapped potential here. And this could possibly bring our, female labor force participation rate, which dropped to 16.1% during the pandemic last year, in the third quarter of last year, possibly bring this up, possibly encourage more women to join the workforce. What do you think female entrepreneurship can do here, and how can it be promoted?
So Definitely, right. I think there is enough data to suggest that when women are in leadership positions, they make more inclusive decisions and are more open-minded about what qualifies as work. In terms of hours and where you work from, and that in and of itself can enable a lot of people that find it hard to go to a structured workplace, but still have enough hours in the day to do work, right? So net I think definitely having more women leaders and more women founders would solve that problem. Now, how do you do that, right? How do you do that? That goes back to something you mentioned sometime back in the talk, is that we need to find women the capital to do so, right? Which means that if the capital gap, which also you stated, I think less than 3% globally, less than 2% in the US, India is probably somewhere around that or a little bit lower in terms of capital, in terms of dollars invested into women-led businesses. Now, obviously, if you're able to change that, that would require a ton of capital being available to women at the early stage, because you can make, we are making the assumption that when we do that, women will be more fair in the way that they hire and they retain staff and inclusion and diversity in their workforce.
Fair
But
assumption.
that is generally speaking true, right? Like about half of our workforce and about half of our leadership is female, not because we are constantly thinking about it. I think just when you have a diversity in the leadership, you automatically, the decisions and diversity sort of trickle down throughout the organization. So we have to then solve for capital, coaching, mentorship, etc. of female founders, and ensure that they are creating jobs that are fairer and employing more women. And this doesn't only have to happen in the new age startups and technology space. This can happen essentially across the board. Small businesses, I think, would be a great place to start. There's sufficient data that shows that diversity in terms of having business owners, SME business owners, is also great for business outcomes. Women are often the pillar of where microfinance money ends up going to, and so on and so forth, when there are positive outcomes associated with that. So definitely, I think finding female entrepreneurs, big or small, SMEs to startups, making sure they have access to capital, making sure they have access to enough capital so they can iterate and fail and still succeed in the long run, is, I think, incredibly important. And but it's a big challenge that needs to be solved. Otherwise, 10 years later, we'll have a more pronounced gap than we have today.
For sure. Thank you so much for pointing that out. I think Aniket has dropped out the call, and we'll check with him as to whether he can join back. We have him back. Great.
Right.
Aniket, no worries. I actually was very keen to come to you with, what you think the role is for men here in this conversation, and particularly the role that men can play in, bringing in diversity and inclusion, both in the workplace as well as in the realm of public policy, which you are very closely associated with and very informed about.
So I think largely we need to change the decision makers and get more diversity and equality there, because I think if you want to make changes, I feel in the workplaces or in policy, we have to see who are making those decisions. Our investment managers or partners are mostly men. Our policy decision makers, we have politicians who are mostly men. We have not been able to pass a simple women reservations bill in this country for the last 38 years. So the fact is that, if we are going to have largely, if you look at data, for example, about 20 out of the 30 states in this country, about 27, 28 have chief secretaries who are men, top bureaucrats who are men. So I think the policy decision making there in terms of who's making the decision becomes very important. And I think that's where diversity, or that's where I think we need a lot more, as I think we need to open up the doors there much more, and I think then it'll have a larger impact. I think in terms of government schemes, for example, and policies as well, we are, rather than doing a lot of structural changes, I think a lot of changes that are done are largely on popular policies. I think Abhina mentioned earlier how transgender people do not have even basic documentation. We work with a lot of trust. We work with Humsafar Trust and a bunch of others on these issues, and that's a very that's a basic problem, right? Like if you're going to create a program for cash transfer or any kind of government program, but you don't even have identity documents in place, it's like saying that the car you own or the house you own or the land you own, tomorrow somebody comes back to you and says you don't even have the basic Aadhaar in place or basic documentation in place. So again, there I feel the policies and programs that we are making on these issues, I think it requires a lot more dialogue and ground up kind of observations and input, and also at the top I think we need more people, more diversity. It's the same kind of people it's the same kind of mindset, which is like I said, comes from a lot of privilege, comes from a lot of mindset of giving, as if it's something that that they're doing for someone. I think should not be the attitude. If we want to make our workplaces better, if we want to make our economy better, these are things that need to be done for all of us. I think we are all going to suffer if you're not going to become diverse. I mean, that it is not something as an attitude that I see in when I talk to a lot of founders or a lot of people in organizations or decision makers. It's usually that, we are doing this because it's a very great thing to do. It's not a great thing to do for you. It's not a great thing to do for a particular thing. It's a great thing to do for all of us, because I don't think the ecosystem will survive, the Indian ecosystem, for long if we do not have enough participation of work from all genders.
For sure. I think the benefits of these are, very clear. And the more quickly the economic benefits of inclusion are recognized, the better it will be in terms of driving change. And since we're almost out of time, I really want to, give a shout out to those who have been listening and posting comments in the chat, to Fani, Jyoti, Rashi, Arnaz, Dilip, Amit, Brinda, Deepthi, thank you so much for sharing your questions and comments in the chat. And before we wrap up, I just want to very quickly take last comments from all of you, Abhina, Ankiti, and Aniket. I want to ask you, in three different realms, one being business, one being public policy, and the third being public spaces. One to each of you. What's the one simple change that you would like to see starting tomorrow for inclusion? So, Ankiti, to you in terms of business, what's the one change you would like to see starting tomorrow to promote inclusion of women and gender minorities? You're on mute.
Sorry. I would start with immediately ending economic disparity and pay gap.
Sure. Thank you. Aniket, to you, in the public policy realm, what's the one change you would like to see starting tomorrow to promote inclusion?
So I think in public policy, largely I would say that if we can have policies which are, like I said, the decision makers, we have a lot more diversity. I think people who are taking decisions, which I already mentioned. And also, I think in our policies, specific to government schemes, our largest workforce on the ground are women. If you look at health, education, any kind of service that is done, I think better pay to them would be fantastic, because I think even today during COVID, a large part of our work that is being delivered in terms of our hopes of vaccinating everyone in this country rest a lot on the networks that we have built with Asha workers and Anganwadi workers. So I think on policy there, I think fair pay is going to be really, really crucial. And I think that will be a big game changer, because then women and other genders will not be seen as secondary kind of contributors to the household. They will get more opportunities in that terms.
Thanks a lot, Aniket. And last word to you, Abhina. What's the one change that you would like to see in public spaces to drive home inclusion?
Yeah, actually, I would highlight three things. One is very important. One is that I think, Ankiti talked about women entrepreneurship. I would like to see a really good trans entrepreneurship. And as a sisterhood, I appeal to people like Ankiti and other people who are part of the entrepreneurship, please, if Amul can happen, if Lijat Papad can happen with the density of women, with a cooperative, I'm sure with trans people like us has lot of talent and lot of offer to give to the GDP. Explore that possibility. The second, with the policy, I want to see the reservation, because the fact remains is right now we are like almost 100 years going behind. So I think unless there is a reservation for people like us in the media, into the business setup, into the educational setup, I don't see a light for our development. It would take another 1,000 years. I must reiterate here, from last 2 years, transgender people are earning Padma Shris. In 2018, Padma Shri has been given to the transgender person Natraj Nartaki, and in 2019, the Padma Shri has been given to Jogappa. And this we are doing it without any support. So with support we can do much more. I think I would see next, at least we will be a responsible government. At least I will see a responsible prime minister of a transgender person who understand both the perspective. And the last thing I would like to appeal is for the family support. The evidence says that is, if the family accepts a transgender person, the transgender people, maybe Sushant Digvikar, Ghazal Dariwal, so many examples where the transgender person can reach to the fullest potential that could be possible, to reach to as a very dignified person of this country, and represent this country with all the virtues and values that can be possible. So I would really appeal for a stigma elimination and acceptance from the own family. If the family accepts, I don't think so society has any other option other than to accept that child. So that's it. I mean, that's what I have to say about it, Madhvi. I think we have a long way to go, but this can be really possible if all of us come together as sisters and brothers and make sure that is we join hands for what we believe is right.
Thank you so much, Abina, for really laying the groundwork for what we need to do next. And thank you so much, Aniket and Ankiti, for your inputs as well. I really loved being a part of this conversation, and I've learned so much. And I'm sure there's a lot that we can talk about. So hopefully, we can take this conversation ahead. And I would love to, speak to all of you further. To talk about how some of these challenges can be dealt with. But thank you so much for these learnings. And thank you, Dalberg. Thank you, Nudge Foundation, for giving us this space. It's been wonderful.
No, thank you so much, Madhavi, and thank you so much, Abina, Ankiti, and Aniket. It was wonderful having you here. This was truly an eye-opening session in understanding the impact of exclusion, not only on individuals, but economy as a whole, and how important diversity is. Like you said, Aniket, it's great for all of us to have diversity, and we really hope going forward that some of that comes into play. I know things are already starting to look better. But thank you so much. Unfortunately, Sweta wasn't able to be here because of tech issues, and she sends her apologies. But
No
I quickly
worries.
wanted to wrap up this session and let everybody know that we now have a plenary, a fireside chat with Kunal Kapoor, the founder of Keto Asia. And after that, the gender track will be hosting Voices from the Ground, Thoda Hai, Thode Aur Ki Baki Hai, at 2:15 p.m. And we hope to see you all there.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks to our listeners as well.